Hello everyone, this is Jotto, bringing you the HearthStone Weekly, bringing you the top decks, bringing you the top cards, and state of the metagame for this week's tournament. So without further ado, let's get started, shall we? So, top 8 of Mana Grind's tournament. Huge diversity. Everyone was playing something different, basically. We had some sort of similarities to Shaman decks, but not much. They were all different, which is amazing to see. It shows the metagame is very healthy right now. First place, another Warlock. Avatar playing Zerglock, focused on flooding the board as much as possible. Rhea with Paladin control based on healing, came second. Third was Forsen playing a Hunter Trap type deck. Fourth, Spaj, Shaman midrange. Second top 8 in a row for him. Good job. And Rhea, second place in a row. Also a good job. Jin playing the first rogue spell-based aggro I have ever seen. That was the first rogue deck to make it that far, along with Chronox, who played rogue spell power control. So you have two completely polar opposite rogue decks making it into top 8. Congrats on that. Calamity, warrior combo. A deck which I personally didn't think could get top 8, but it did. So, Calamity, you proved me wrong. Round of applause for Calamity, shall we? Space Wizard made it with Shaman, early game mid-range. It's kind of odd. It's like a Shaman mid-range deck, but he focuses a bit on the 4 cost, 5 cost, as opposed to the 6 cost, 7 cost. So, Avatar's deck, Zerglock. Now, at first glance, this looks a bit like a token deck, but it's not, because it has about half the token deck cards, in the case of Knife Juggler, and Illidan, and Imp Master, and Hogger, of course, but not all of them. And the bulk of the deck revolves around things like Flesh-Eating Ghoul, Power Overwhelming, Cult Master, Thromar Farseer. Big burst damage, just flatten everything on the board, punch through the defenses, and then just wreck you. Now, the interesting tech in this deck, yay, is Lawworker Cho. Lawworker Cho steals any spells played by your opponent, essentially, and in a deck with very, very, very few spells, not much of an issue. So he just gets all the spells his opponent casts to get rid of his board, and he gives them practically nothing. Very powerful deck. Avatar, first time I've seen him as well. He came from nowhere, came first. That's amazing. On to Rhea, second in a row, I do believe. Yeah. He can't get first, ever. Anyway, so, Paladin control, polar opposite to what people have been seeing me play particularly, which is more mid-range and early game decks. This is the polar opposite of it. This is a lay on hands, holy light deck that just rolls around healing as much as possible and slowly grinding your opponent down. Use things like True Silver Champion for removal, Hogger for defense, lay on hands for card draw. There's the Iron Beak Owl there, silences, expected Wild Pyromancer. I said people would be playing these things. Wild Pyromancer in this tournament successfully rooted out every single token and most aggro decks. So, yeah, that's why it's there, and it works. Noble Sacrifice redirects everything. Tyrion, just a very solid legendary, very, very defensive deck, and it worked. Forsen. Now, he didn't want to provide us with his deck list, which is understandable. I mean, he has a very unique deck, and he doesn't want people to know about it as much. I understand that. So, what we're going to go off is what we do know about the deck. He uses traps to fuel Eaglehorn Bow for board control, just continuous 3 damage all the time. King Crush is his last final card to close out the game. Mana Wraith slows the game down for both players. The reason that's important is because he needs it for the traps. And it runs every kind of hunter-based removal. I mean every single kind. He just removes everything and then just slowly closes it out with hero power and some minions. So, Spaj. Second top 8 in a row. With the second mid-range deck, they are slightly different. This one has only 1 Feral Spirit and 2 Rock Bitter Weapon, 2 Stormforge Axe, things like that. Stormforge Axe is amazing for board control early, because now with the changes, there are very few 2-drops with 3 health, and a lot of 2-drops with 2 health. So you just get rid of all the 2-drops. Fire Elemental, the ultimate Elven Archer, just completely eviscerates anything. Earthshock, the best silence in the game in my opinion. Things like Rockbitter Weapon to give onto Wind Fury that you can get from Windspeaker. Very well synergized deck, very powerful, and very effective. Jin! Playing a rogue spell-based aggro. This confused the hell out of me, but it works. Things like Shiv and Sinister Strike put pressure on your opponent with Head Crack, and then the minions in this deck include things like Leopardome for early pressure, Nightblade to close out the game, Defias Ringleader for that turn 2 or turn 1 combo with the coin, Loot Hoarder to draw you more cards, Novice Engineer to draw you more cards, Cold Blood to finish out the game with Nightblade essentially, and things like Phantom Knives to clear the board. Very, very well thought out deck, very unique. I haven't seen one like this, and I hope to see more of them. So, Chronox. Rogue Spell Power Control, an archetype that has been around for a little while, but no one seems to have get it to work. Now, this is playing some very interesting cards, like Azure Drake. Now, I've been in the metagame for a long time, people. Like, since Cockatrice started, and Azure Drake has not been around for ages. It's lovely to see that card again. I love Azure Drake, personally. I think it's very well rounded, it's just not quite as powerful as it could be, really. Anyway, so, Azure Drake's side, things like Gadgetzan Auctioneer, continuously draw cards, and if you conceal one of those things, oh, they do not have fun with that. Sinister Strike puts on pressure, Headcrack puts on pressure, everything else has spell power, essentially. Malagos ends the game if he's not dealt with. Things like that. Preparation allow you to just get out those extra spells every single turn, and Sentient Shieldmaster stops all forms of aggro. So, Calamity playing the first warrior deck in top 8. A lot of firsts in this tournament. Anyway, he's playing a combo deck which revolves around completely killing you with Warsong Commander and Molten Giants, followed by, well, let's just say his average combo was Warsong, Molten Giant, attack for 10, free, because he had low health. Youthful Brewmaster, back to your hand, play it again, attack for another 10. Youthful Brewmaster, back to your hand, play it again, another 10. And in case you weren't dead already, he had another Molten Giant. I'll put it that way, he just completely flattened people with the Giant Stampede. And also weapons, just to clear the board of taunt minions, very important, with shield block so that he can stay on that low amount of health he needs. And execute to deal with big stuff. Very, very, very interesting deck. First of its kind that's gone this far up. Not a new archetype, but one that works, and Calamity made it work. So, Space Wizard. Rounding out the top 8, we have Shaman, early game mid-range. What do I mean by that? I mean that most of his stuff is fairly, 3 to 6, as opposed to 6 to like 8. In this case, we have things like Argent Commander to deal with those big stuff, and Lava Burst to deal with direct damage, and Cult Master and Silvermoon Guardians for those mid to early game board presence. Hexes deal with big things, Direwolf Alf buffs things. Rockbitter Weapons, just insane. Flametongue Totem, even more buffing things, and a ton of removal. Every single time of removal you can even think of. And then, if you're not dead, there's Sylvanas Windrunner, the highest stats 5-drop, along with a couple of other legendaries, and Alakir the Windlord. Completely pointless once he had his turn, because he always gets silenced. But apart from that, he's insane. He does 6 damage over 2 targets, and if you Rockbitter him, it's even more. It's 12 damage over 2 targets. So, that's the top 8. On to the top 5 neutral cards. Now, there are a few up there that have either been on previous top neutral card lists, or have been in my last top 5 for each phase of the game. In fact, the only one that wasn't there was Novice Engineer, and he was on the first ever neutral card top. So the metagame seems to be switching back a bit to vanilla, which is weird. It's weird. The metagame seems to have shifted a little bit back in time, sort of to that moment around the first tournament and just before, just there's more decks this time. So, we've got Novice Engineer, most played card, which is insane for a 2-drop to get that high. But when you think about it, he draws you a card. I mean, I've talked about Novice Engineer in the past. He just draws you a card, he cycles it for 2 mana, and he's a 1/2 body. Why not? He deals with things like Leper Gnome, and he cycles you a card. Sure. Sentient Shieldmaster, one of the best 4-drops in the game, as I talked about in my last video. One of the best, most reliable 4-drops in the game, played in a lot of decks, and just very good. Hogger, we won't see him next tournament, because next tournament doesn't have epics or legendaries in it. So this is the last performance from Hogger for a while, which is a shame, because he's made 2 consecutive top 5s. Very, very powerful card. Even when Pyromancer came onto the field and wiped out the Illidan popularity, Hogger stayed true, because his tokens are 2/2s. Anyway, Sylvanas Windrunner, one of the best 5-drops in the game. Enough said. Talk about it more later. Anyway, well, Pyromancer. The Pyromancer train seems to be about a month late, but it eventually arrived and completely wrecked the metagame, as I said it would. So, Novice Engineer cycles cards, deals with 1-drops, deals with some 2-drops, deals with some 3-drops, depending on their health ratios. Played in 3 decks. Really awesome. Did I mention that? Hope so. I don't really need to talk about this card anymore. I talked about it in my first ever weekly, and now I just need to talk about what people are using it for. Sentient Shieldmaster. Not much to talk about with this card. There's a trend in this top 5. It's not an interesting card. It's just a good card. It's a 3/5 for 4 with taunt. You must hit it. And it blocks everything. And that's its job. And it also kills things it blocks. Sure. Also played in 3 decks. Hogger. His final performance for a while. Those nulls are insane. He just keeps summoning nulls all the time. If he gets 1 null out, it's okay. He sort of paid for himself if he gets removed. He gets 2 nulls out, your opponent is crying. If he gets 3, it's game over, basically. Played in 2 decks. The reason he wasn't played more is because 6-drops are a bit hard to come by sometimes, but his effect is one of the sickest ones on 6-drops and very worth testing. Sylvanas. In my opinion, the strongest mid-game minion in the game, partly because the average stat total for 5-drops is 9, and hers is 10, and she also has one of the most insane abilities in the game. You do not want to kill Sylvanas when she's not silenced, but you have to because she's a 5/5 that's hitting you in the face every single turn, and you can't ignore 5/5s. And on top of that, having 5 health means she doesn't die to things like Shadow Bolt, unlike Ancient Brewmaster, who has 4 health. So yeah, one of the strongest mid-game minions in the game, played in 2 decks. Partly, as I said, when you get higher cost 5-drops, you only have a limited amount of them, and sometimes the other 5-drops are better in certain situations. So, the Pyromancer train is here. Now, Pyromancer successfully went through the metagame like a knife through butter and completely incinerated it. He turned a token-based metagame into a token-less metagame. Yeah, and this guy is going to be sticking around. In the next tournament, a lot of the burst removal like Pyroblast and Avenging Wrath and Big Game Hunter is gone. So what are people going to turn to? The good old Pyromancer. This guy is going to become more popular, and if you notice, the list currently, there are 2 legendaries that also were in 2 decks. This guy is not legendary, he's rare, and he was playing the same amount of decks. What happens when those things are gone? He's played in even more, because you have the deck space. He's gonna be insane. He's one of the best 2-drops in the game, in my opinion. He was played less than Novice Engineer, but Novice Engineer is played because he cycles cards, not because of stats or effect, really. The point of Novice Engineer is that he shortens your deck effectively by making it 2 cards less, because as soon as you play him, you go to an next one. Pyromancer as a 2-drop without that cycling effect is stronger by far. He has higher stats, he has a more powerful ability in my opinion, and he wrecks things, and that is what Pyromancer does. Expect to see more of this card. So, state of the metagame, extremely diverse. Thank you, people. No class is dominating at all. No archetype is dominating at all. We had our token and mid-range thing last time. No longer. Wide range of neutral cards. When I did the list, I couldn't find one that was played more than 3 times. Only 2 were played 3 times. And there were pages of neutral cards. Tons of them were played. Very nice to see. This shows that the balance of Hearthstone currently is at a decent level, and until we see another archetype that completely breaks the metagame, it seems like it's going to stay there. Until we have our next tokens, this is the kind of metagame we are playing in, and I like it. It is very balanced. I really like where the metagame is at right now. Anyway, thank you for watching the Hearthstone Weekly. Comment on any improvements I should make to the show. Feedback is always welcomed. I am trying to make this for the community, so feedback from the community is very useful to me. New video comes out every week. This is every other week, but on the intermediate weeks I talk about the competitive sides of the metagame and any news from Blizzard that requires attention. So subscribe if you want to see more of that kind of stuff. But as for now, this is Jotto, signing off.